Hi, folks. Greg Riccardi here of My Favorite Show. Dr. Call is off tonight, but tonight we bring you a very special edition of My Favorite Show. Tonight we're going to be speaking about forgiveness. Okay, big topic. And our guest tonight's going to be Cliff Edwards. Cliff is the author of The Forgiveness Handbook, a simple guide to freedom of the mind and heart. So stay tuned for this very special broadcast.
You're listening to My Favorite Show, where Dr. Richard Call and Greg Riccardi discuss the matters that matter most. Join the conversation by calling 800-962-1160. And now, Dr. Call and Greg Riccardi of My Favorite Show.
Okay, folks, my name is Greg Riccardi here at My Favorite Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'd like to welcome a very special guest, Cliff Edwards of...
Hello, Greg.
Where are you from, Cliff? What kind of organization are you? Just Cliff Edwards or...
Well, I'm an author, I'm a coach, I'm a speaker, and a trainer. I live in San Diego, California, and I recently wrote and published a book called The Forgiveness Handbook.
Forgiveness Handbook. That sounds interesting. Tell us about Forgiveness Handbook.
Well, you know, forgiveness is one of those words that has a lot of misconceptions around it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, when you say the word, it's like, whew, goes right over their heads. They think It doesn't apply to them, or, you know, there's stuff about why they would want to forgive.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, recently I've been starting to understand that it's not about forgiveness so much, at least in terms of getting people to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
It's about pointing out what this will actually do.
Mm-hmm.
So recently I found that I've been working primarily with midlife women who are having issues in their relationships, whether it's their primary relationship with a spouse or a partner, whether it's with an elderly parent or with children, that there's some kind of frustration or sense of dissatisfaction or inability to feel good about the relationships. And usually that's because there's some kind of resentments, there's some grudges, there's stuff from the past that's unresolved.
Mm-hmm. So midlife women, you said, mostly?
Yeah, midlife women. You know, women anywhere from their late 30s, 40s, 50s, who are starting to refine themselves, especially after having kids. I find that many of the women are in their 40s, late 40s, and 50s now. Their kids are grown and gone. They're starting to try to determine who they are separate from their children and separate from the family and create a new identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, oddly enough, this emotional education and forgiveness work that I do with people seems to, or is very effective at bringing them into that new place of understanding, new place of clearing the decks,
Mm-hmm.
and really being able to express themselves as who they are going forward, as opposed to who they have been in the past.
Okay, so what would you say is the core aspect or core fundamental principle of your work? If you could sum it up in a short, you know.
It's releasing negative judgments, letting go of negative judgments.
Okay.
Now, again, in terms of helping people to understand what forgiveness is, to me, forgiveness is simply about shifting those negative judgments that you have about yourself, about somebody else, or about a situation, shifting those negative judgments to either a neutral or preferably a positive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like to use the pushpin analogy for forgiveness.
Okay.
That
you stick the person with the pushpin? No.
Yeah. So you can think of the pushpin as the negative judgment.
Right.
Have you ever been in one of those offices or a hallway where there's a great big bulletin board or cork board on the wall, and there's all these flyers and things hanging off it, and
Mm-hmm.
there's stacks of things under pushpins?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you can think of yourself as that cork board,
Okay.
the negative judgment as the pushpin,
Right.
and all the flyers and photos and clippings and things hanging off of that pushpin as the negative emotions,
Okay.
as the negative belief systems, as the grudges, the resentments, the guilt, the shame, whatever it is, the limitation that you're dragging around with you.
Right.
So as long as that negative judgment is in place, all of that stuff is stuck to you.
Right. Pretty cool.
But Greg, what happens when you pull out a pushpin from one of those cork boards?
Whatever stuck to it just drops.
It drops away. And
Right.
it's the same thing with forgiving.
Right.
When you shift that negative judgment to a neutral or a positive. When you decide for yourself that, hey, that wasn't bad, it wasn't wrong, that I actually gained value from that experience, or I learned something from that experience, then you can shift that negative judgment, remove the push pin, all of this stuff drops away.
Excellent.
All of a sudden, you're no longer burdened down with the resentments, the grudges, the guilt, the shame, the anger, the hatred, the whatever else you've been dragging around for years and years. Whatever else it was that was creating a separation between you and the other person.
So I would imagine, Cliff, that there is a strategy that you use to help someone, remove that push pin?
Yeah, actually, there's several different strategies, but what I typically do with people is take them through a several-step process, a real simple step-by-step process. And that process is what I call the emotional education. It actually sets a foundation of new perspectives and understandings of ways of being so that the forgiveness becomes a natural result of who you are now, as opposed to something that you have to struggle for or work for or try really hard. One of the things I hear about people or hear from people about forgiveness is that, well, I'd like to forgive and move on, but I just don't know how. And so really what I've got is the how. I've got the very clearly defined, easy to follow, step-by-step process that will guide people from resentment and righteous beliefs and anger and guilt and shame to feeling free and clear. I call it freedom of the mind and heart.
Excellent. So do you have any, of course you don't have to mention names, Cliff, but do you have any examples that you can give us in terms of how someone could work through their emotional, I like the push pin analogy. Can you give us an example of how someone actually processed whatever issue they had to move on and actually forgive?
Yeah, sure. But, before I do that, I'd like to share a little bit about my own story, why I'm doing what I'm doing, especially with forgiveness.
Yeah.
I've been a coach and a trainer for many, many years. I've trained practically 1,000 coaches around the world. And I've had the opportunity to go through lots of deep process, emotional process with people and take people through processes of forgiveness. And I was doing this for years and years, but while I was working with other people and spending so much time and being so busy helping others, I kind of neglected myself.
Okay.
And so I ended up leaving this position, this job I'd been in for many years in 2011 to take a sabbatical because I recognized I needed to just step back and decompress. And as I was doing that, I recognized also how much stuff I had built up. When I was working so hard to help other people, that I was in a team and had little resentments come up or little conflicts come up or little things that I just pushed down instead of taking care of and resolving in the moment. And so one of the first things I recognized is that I had a lot of my own forgiveness work to do. And that point was really driven home when a couple months later I was diagnosed with lymphoma. And lymphoma is a cancer of the immune system. And of course, immune systems have been shown to be compromised by stress, by unresolved issues, by emotional and physical burdens that you carry around. And so it made perfect sense to me. And in my own process of healing from this lymphoma, forgiveness is one of the key tools that I used. And as I dove into it more and more deeply for myself, I also began to focus on working with forgiveness with other people. And so now I've taken dozens and dozens of people through this process of forgiveness and seen the way that they actually move from separation, feeling estranged, isolated, to feeling connected with themselves and with others once again. And so a specific example of that, I have a client that I finished working with just a few weeks ago who was adopted. She was adopted into a family that was very different than her birth family, or her birth parents. And she went through her entire life feeling like an outsider and feeling like she was very different and there was something wrong with her. She just didn't fit in. And she had lots of proof, lots of evidence through experiences with her father and with her adoptive mother that,
Mm-hmm.
that proved to her that she didn't fit and that she was the oddball in the family. And so we went through this process of forgiveness, and she was able to see how she had actually created many of the judgments about them, how she had adopted and held on to judgments about herself that caused her to feel separate, that caused her to feel like she was out of place. And I remember one particular session, especially in which we went through a process in which she went back to a time that she was first adopted and first made the belief that there was something different about her and that she didn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
She was able to reconnect in an extraordinarily powerful way with her inner child. And this is something she'd been telling me the entire time. She'd told me over and over, well, I don't feel like I really have an inner child, or I can connect with an inner child. I don't feel like that part of me is there.
Yeah.
And when she did that, all of a sudden, everything shifted for her.
Mm-hmm.
She let go of all the judgments and all the resentments and all the regrets about her family. She suddenly felt like she belonged in a completely new way, and that she was really clear on her purpose in what she's here to do with her life and do with herself now, especially that her family's raised.
Right.
And so it was really heartwarming to see that. And I've seen examples of that over and over and over, where people have been able to reconnect with themselves, to actually shift the beliefs, to remember experiences of the past in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
to extract the value and be able to move forward with power, with grace, with creativity, and feeling free in mind and heart.
Great. Now, this is someone you haven't met, right? This is someone that you've coached over the phone. How does the process work? Tell us a little bit about the process, actually in terms of working with a client.
Okay. Well, I work in groups and I work individually. Generally, when I work individually, we do it over the phone. This particular client I was talking about was in Europe. And so there's no limitation. I can work with anyone from anywhere. Sometimes I'll take people through a 1 or a 2 day process in person.
Okay.
And so we'll have a group and we'll go through these experiences all together. And it's really powerful to have it happen in a group setting as well. I do group work over the phone as well, teleclasses or webinars.
Yep.
My cat's back here.
And yeah.
Teleclasses and webinars.
Uh-huh.
But the most effective work, obviously, is the individual work that I do with clients over the phone.
Sure.
It's most effective because they get the most individual attention. We can work specifically on their issues and their whatever it is that's there for them.
Mm-hmm. So is there, why don't you give us an example of someone who might be out there listening who may, have some issues. Most of us have some type of issue or some block that they have in some area of their life. So what would you say is a common maybe objection or a common false belief someone might have in terms of actually like hey, I don't need that. What are some of the resistance you come up against, and then obviously what's your answer to that?
Right. Well, of course. In fact, I wrote the book to address many of the real common objections to forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, I'm not talking about it as much in the terms of forgiveness anymore, because there are really common objections. Mm-hmm. One of the common objections is, well, if I forgive, it means I let that person who did me wrong off the hook.
Right.
I'm letting them get away with something.
Mm-hmm.
Or another common misconception is, well, if I forgive, it means that I have to go back into the relationship in the way it was before.
Right.
I can't do that.
Uh-huh.
Another common misconception that people have is that by holding on to a resentment or a grudge, that they're somehow punishing the other person and getting back at them.
Right.
But my answer to all these objections is that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself.
Right.
It's something that you do to set yourself free.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, when you're holding on to those negative judgments, when you're judging a situation as having been bad or wrong, or it shouldn't have been like that,
mm-hmm.
it means that you're still burdening yourself with all the emotion of it, with all the unresolved stuff. I call it emotional baggage.
Right. All those
again, it's all the
push
flyers
pins.
And things.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Awesome. So,
and so when you forgive, do it to set yourself free.
Uh-huh. Awesome, awesome. So, listen, we're nearing the end of our time here. Give us, one final thought, if you would, as far as the work that you do, and then how someone could contact you to discuss possibly becoming a client.
Sure. Well, I guess what I'd like to do to wrap it up here is just to describe what I mean by freedom of the mind and heart. Because people don't come to me they don't come to me for forgiveness. They come to me for some result, some relationship that they want to heal, or
Right.
a way that they want to set themselves free or be able to feel more self-expressed.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by freedom of the mind of heart is free of the burdens of the past and the present. To be free of the frustrations and anxiety that are caused by unresolved issues in relationships. To be free of the limiting thoughts and beliefs about yourself and what you're capable of or what you deserve. A lot of people who hold on to grudges and resentments are also punishing themselves. They don't
Right.
feel like they deserve much.
Mhm.
To be free of the nagging doubts and fears of what other people would think of you. To be free of the critical voice in your head, that little thing that's always going off, judging you and judging others.
I don't have one of those.
Yeah, nobody does.
Okay, sorry.
That was taken care of with the new administration, right?
Yeah, right.
To be free of the grudges and resentment and anger and blame towards others. That stuff that would have you feel tense or uptight when somebody else is around, somebody else that you're holding something against. And of course, to be free of the regret and the guilt and the shame and the self-recrimination that you hold towards yourself. The ways that you continually beat yourself up
Yeah.
for incidents or events of the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, people come to me for the result. They come to me for the freedom. They come to me
Right.
for the ability to be self-expressed,
Mm-hmm.
for the ability to reconnect and have relationships, again, that are healthy and loving with people in their lives, the most important people in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I had a client not too long ago who had been holding stuff against her mother for
Right.
years and years, just
Yeah.
holding a grudge. And even though she felt like she had a close relationship with her mother, there was always this sense of tension and this little voice of judgment running about her mother. And she could never really feel connected in the way that she wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, going through this forgiveness work, going through this liberate your mind and heart process, she was able to let all of that go and to create a relationship with her mother and feel really close to her and connected to her mother before her mom died. Her mother's getting older now, and it won't be too long before she passes.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would say to people is to think about some of those really important relationships in your life, those ones that still have a little bit of stuff around, and think
Yeah.
what it would feel like to be on your deathbed and know that you hadn't resolved that, and that you were estranged from a child or from a sibling, to have a parent pass away or a sibling pass away, knowing that you hadn't ever resolved that issue between yourselves, that you really wanted to, and you hadn't had the level of connection. And so that's what this work is all about. Again, it's work of the heart. It's work of the mind, but it's particularly work of the heart. And the good news is that it doesn't take a lot of crying. It doesn't take great big emotional releases. It doesn't take anything other than simply being willing to ask for your own guidance and insight from inside.
Beautifully put. Anything else? But I know one more question. How long does a typical coaching process take?
The individual coaching process is 10 weeks.
Okay.
So I work with people over a period, well, it's 10 sessions. It can be 10 weeks, or it could be 20 weeks, or it could be 15 weeks, depending on what works for people. Typically, it's 10 sessions over 10 weeks.
And people mostly get results most people get results in that time frame.
Most people start getting results after the first session, of course.
There you go. Good.
Because it builds, it's step by step. Again, it's a process of emotional education.
Right.
giving new ways of thinking about yourself and others. I call it the ladder of freedom because each week, in each session, you take a step up further and further and further out of that self-excavated pit of despair or resentment or stuckness, whatever it is.
Right. You certainly have a lot of analogies to describe what you do and how the process works, and it's very helpful.
Yeah, well, I think that people relate really well to analogies, and I've got a bunch more of them, and guarantee if you work with me, you'll hear all kinds of analogies that really help make sense and make things go click.
Excellent. How does somebody, like I said, buy the book, reach you for coaching, check out your website, give us all that?
Sure. It can be reached at cliff@empowerpeople.com. That's Cliff with 2 F's, at empowerpeople, EMPOWERPEOPLE.com. You can go get my book. You can go to theforgivenesshandbook.com, find out more about the book, buy the book through Amazon, or purchase the book signed in autographed copy of the book on the website. And I also have a website called Forgiveness Club, where you can go and watch a few videos and get some other information, blogs and other information. So again, I invite people to see what it is, to really get honest, what it is that feels unresolved and that they want to be free of. And this process can give the result of freedom of the mind and heart.
Fantastic. Well, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your time, Cliff. Appreciate you being on the show. And for everyone out there who has an issue that, or may have something that resonates with what Cliff said, definitely reach out to him and give us a call. Let us know how it went, and we'd love to know who you forgave. All right, so thanks so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time. Is there something else you wanted to say?
No, I just wanted to say thanks so much for having me on the show here, Greg. I really enjoyed chatting with you. As you can tell, I do have a lot to say, and I'm very passionate about this topic, so I appreciate letting me share.
You definitely are, and I appreciate your passion, and that I'm sure aids you in your ability to help people. So thanks again, and thanks folks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to My Favorite Show, where Dr. Richard Call and Greg Riccardi discuss the matters that matter most. My Favorite Show is taped live Monday nights at 7 p.m. To watch the video of this broadcast in the WVNJ studio, visit MyFavoriteShow.com.